This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours? Hello again, everybody. This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, and I'm Samu. Nice again to speak to you all, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Guardian Enzo. Enzo, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people from
Hello
rainy
to the
Kyoto.
people.
Nice to talk to you again.
Ironically, from sunny London today on my side. So,
Yeah. What are you gonna
yeah,
do?
we're swapping around today. For this episode, we're actually continuing, like we said, we're doing a Weekly Shonen Jump series. This is another one which we both read, and Enzo, correct me if I'm wrong. Like myself, you've read this one pretty much from the beginning when it came out. Is that right?
Yeah. Whenever there's a new sports series in Jump, I always read it from the beginning because they don't happen that often. And like with Green Greens, which as we record this has just been canceled, as I think we both knew it would be, but it's really a heartbreaker. I always feel like when there's a sports series in Jump, I'm kind of torn. I'm like, should I just not read it because it's probably going to get canceled? Or should I read it from the beginning and really enjoy it while I can because it won't be around? So that's kind of how I approach sports series with Jump. But so yes, I've read Blue Box, pretty much haven't missed a week since the beginning, and kind of had the, we'll get into this more later, but kind of had the sense very early on, as I think you did, that this one was probably going to be an exception and be successful.
Yeah, I think this is. I'll touch on that in a bit, but it's definitely one of those series that felt like it was destined for that from the offset, for multiple reasons, actually. And yeah, it's worth pointing out that I'd say since Haikyuu ended, this is maybe one of the only few surviving sports series that actually you could qualify as a hit. There've been a lot in the past few years that they tried to put out, and as you mentioned, like Green Greens recently. That's one that I think, if you were measuring by quality, that should be a hit. That's not how things work, clearly, all the time. But this is one that is a success in pretty much measurably every way. So this is Blue Box by Kouji Miura. Been published since 2021, still ongoing, like we mentioned, and it is in Weekly Shonen Jump, and as usual, translated by Viz, goes out weekly every issue, same time as us, so it's very easy to keep up to date. And I think you probably should keep up to date with it if you're not already, because there is an anime adaptation coming out in the fall. And yeah, we'll probably go deeper into that later, but I suspect it's going to become even more popular than it already is. So yeah, in terms of just a very brief synopsis, it is a sports series, but it's more, I would say, like sports drama, that sort of combination. I have saw some people label it early on as a rom com, but I think it's established itself as not falling into the genre expectations so much in that sense. But Blue Box focuses on Taiki Inumata, who is a student in his final year of junior high in the beginning of the series. And he's in the boys' badminton team. And every morning he trains, and eventually he comes across an upper class girl. So this is Chinatsu. She's in the basketball team for the high school girls. She's in the first year of high school. So they have that year apart. And in that first chapter, we see that bond that they have, and kind of like the sparks begin from there. And yeah, the first main shift in the story is the revelation that with her family, with Chinatsu's family moving away, she is living with Taiki's family in his house. So in that sense, it does have a kind of typical initial setup for their story together. But as it goes on, it definitely develops its own identity, which I think comes down to what Kouji Miura is trying to achieve with this series. And I say that because context, for anyone who's not familiar with Kouji Miura, she worked under the Kodansha magazines before she moved to Weekly Shonen Jump. She originally was an assistant in Ahiru no Sora, the basketball series, and she had two serializations. Those were Blue Sky Lover and I Love You Sensei. So one of them was on Manga Box and the other on Weekly Shonen Magazine. Neither were particularly long. I don't know specifically if they were cancelled or that was how long they were planned to be. But I will say, I haven't read I Love You Sensei, but if anyone does ever check it out after reading Blue Box, it's a very, very different series. It's basically like a full blown ecchi rom com with the premise of a male high school teacher and two high school girls who are very open and like obsessed with professing their love to him multiple times, getting caught up in all these antics that you would expect. It just feels like a whole different beast from Blue Box, which is so much more tamer, I think, rooted in realism both for the relationship and the sports dynamic, which makes me think I wonder if Kouji Miura moved to Weekly Shonen Jump with that intention, rather than stick with Weekly Shonen Magazine. So she did move in 2020 to do two one shots. She did one called Parasol Alliance and Jump Giga, which I liked. It was very good. And she did the one shot for Blue Box and Jump as well, some months before it began serialization. And uh, I will say, for being online and reading it when it came out and amongst circles of people who were reading one shots for these for the issues, this was one that instantly had buzz, and there was this collective agreement amongst everyone that, oh, this is going to be a serialization. It felt like, to me, one of the most obvious predictions in like modern time, comparing other one shots that became successful series. So I would say even before the series started, I already envisioned this sort of life for it, and I think it deserves it. I think it's cemented itself in a good spot in the magazine, and yeah. While I'm sure there's some things we'll both critique about it, it's I think the fact that it exists in Weekly Shonen Jump and adds romance without necessarily feeling like it has to conform to being a rom com or ecchi in that sense, I feel is just refreshing, and yeah, it's one of my favorite parts about it. But that's a little bit of history and context. So what about yourself, Enzo? What's your experience with Blue Box? Your like general thoughts and feelings before we get into specific points?
Well, I would say the first thing for me is I had never read anything by Miura, Koji Miura, before this. I don't think I'd ever actually even heard of her before this. So this, I went into Blue Box completely kind of virginal on her as a mangaka. And I would ask you this question. Just, I'm curious to hear your answer. If you read this online somewhere with no idea where it was serialized, just the first chapter, would you have thought it's more like a Weekly Shonen Jump series or more like a Weekly Shonen series? What would you have? Where would you have pigeonholed it?
See, my expectation, I think, for Weekly Shonen Magazine is that it does kind of lean into that ecchi rom com, uh, like those genre expectations. But then so does Weekly Shonen Jump for so many years, for decades, in fact. This doesn't. This almost feels like a new approach to a Jump rom com as well. So I don't know if I would necessarily think it feels like either, which I think
Okay,
is
that's
why I
fair.
enjoy it so much, because frankly, there's not as many Jump romance series that I've read. I still have to revisit ones from like the 80s and 90s, but this is probably my favorite in terms of its approach.
Well, yeah, I think I like what I liked about this series immediately. Well, there's a couple things I liked about it immediately. And one of them is that I'm a huge Adachi Mitsuru fan. So, and I think the similarities with Adachi to an extent are more superficial than they are substantive, but they are, I think, structurally, I think quite significant. And of course, Adachi has mainly written for Shonen Sunday, and maybe that's the magazine where this would have felt like the most natural fit. Now that I think about it, but the thing about Blue Box immediately is I like the fact that Taiki and Chinatsu, I like that what bonded them together initially was their shared kind of dedication. Like they both saw in the other person something that they admired, and then they realized that they liked that about themselves too, which is that they were both really dedicated, and they both were really busting their asses and not really asking anyone else to notice it or give them praise for it. They were just doing it because that was something that they naturally felt like they wanted to do. So I thought that was kind of a very holistic and organic way for a teenage couple to get together in manga. I really liked that. And So that was one thing I liked about it originally. I liked that kind of Adachi feel that draws you in, and before you realize it, this is pretty different from Adachi, but still, there aren't that many series that even make you think of Adachi. So I liked that, and I think the balance of power between the romance and the sports in Blue Box has shifted back and forth like kind of waves on the beach. But broadly speaking, I think it comes as close to an even split between the sports side and the romance side as any series I can think of off the top of my head. I think most Adachi series in the end are more about the relationships than they are about the sports. Whereas I feel like with Blue Box, it's pretty close to an even split, which I think is quite refreshing in its own way. And I don't really know much of anything about badminton other than that it's quite popular in Asia. So I wasn't really into that. But, I like any sports manga as long as the sports is depicted well, and it's depicted well here. This is not one of that new generation of sports manga for people who hate sports. I think this is a sports manga that people who love sports can appreciate for the sports side of it, even if the characters are ultimately kind of what brings home the mail. Like I think it went through a long phase where it was romance heavy, and I think in the current incarnation of it, it's pretty sports heavy lately. But you just have the feeling that it's going to kind of shift back and forth over the course of time, which is something that I really like about it. And as you say, there are things I would criticize, and I think we'll probably both have some things to criticize. But on balance, I think while I didn't read the one shot, I certainly had a feeling from the first chapter, as I said earlier, that this is something that's probably going to be serialized, and it's probably some. Well, I knew it was serialized, but probably something that was going to be successful. I think that was pretty clear early on that it had something going for it.
What I think is funny as well to compare with the one shot, since you said you haven't read it, is in the one shot they have actually, um, let's say, their relationship progressed way faster than even maybe where they are at this point in the story. So that was one element that changed from chapter one, which I think from people who had read the one shot maybe were like, oh, we need to shift our expectations on what the pace of the series is going to be, because it is pretty. It takes its time, both with the sports and the romance elements of it. I would argue it feels fitting to the overall character of the series.
I
Um,
agree.
but yeah, yeah, and also what you said about like the balance of sports, I think that's totally on point. It shifts slightly ever so much. I would say as the series has gone on, it's becoming more and more sports heavy. There have been sections in the past few months, as of the time of recording this, where it's like it almost just feels like a sports manga. There's like 4 or 5 chapters of just straight up matches happening, which I think hasn't really been the case for the most part throughout the series. The sports elements and the matches that we see kind of are in service of the character drama and the development for all the characters involved. Sometimes it would skim over matches because the results or the build up or the training for it was actually more important to the story than having us actually see everything play out, which I think is fine as well. I think it's a nice approach that it takes. I will we mentioned this before, and we've also, we both love sports manga. We've discussed this back, I want to say, like maybe even a decade ago on Random C. But I will say, I actually am not a sports fan in real life. So there are no sports that I keep up with in that sense, but I think when a sports series manages to tap into that drama and like you say, you have ones where maybe you're not so interested or keen on that particular sport in the real world, but if the author and the series as a whole can utilize it in an effective way, which I think it does here, I think that is just yeah. I really that's what I like most about the sports series is the drama, and the character drama is definitely high here at points, but it always I like the balance it has. And I mean, off the back of that, we have these like major relationship dynamics. We touched on Taiki and Chinatsu, and I think we can both agree that it's the strongest dynamic in the series. They're both just
Yep.
from the offset. They're just so endearing. They're both so cute, both of them together. I don't know if I will ever get tired of seeing them interact with each other. We do also have Taiki and Hina, who was an addition compared to the one shot, and some other characters as well. Like we have Taiki's senpai, Kengo, and his girlfriend Karen, which are introduced pretty early in the series as this established couple pre the series beginning. So it doesn't feel like there's any drama in that sense, but they add another element for both Taiki and Chinatsu in the background as well. And as the series is going on, there are more and more characters being introduced, but I feel like I already know the answer to this, Enzo, but obviously you like Taiki and Chinatsu, but any other thoughts and feelings on other characters, other dynamics in the series? How much you like them in comparison?
Though they're obviously my two favorites. I really think they're great. I'm not a big fan of third wheel Hina. We can talk more about that when we get into the spoiler section. I'm also not crazy about, and you're going to have to forgive me on names here, but I'm not crazy about the manager character either. I do like as a supporting character, Taiki's friend, who's again, you're going to have to forgive me on the names, the one with the glasses. His name I've forgotten.
Kyo.
Yeah, who ends up, well, again, we'll get to that in the spoiler section. I think he's interesting because he kind of has the Greek chorus role in a way. He kind of says what you're thinking as a reader a lot of the time, which I think makes him kind of amusing. Um, I also want to briefly sidebar and ask you one more question on this whole issue of you not being a sports fan and yet loving sports manga, and me being a huge sports fan and loving sports manga. So, with regards to series that are like totally unrealistic when it comes to the sports, and not something like Basquatch, which makes no pretense about it, it's science fiction, but a series that sort of in a way, you know, pretends at being realistic while is totally unrealistic. And the one that immediately springs to mind for me is Kuroko no Basuke. I would ask you, as someone who isn't a huge sports fan, is a very smart guy, but isn't a big sports fan and doesn't really care about sports in real life. A, do you sort of sense it when a sports manga is going off script and being totally unrealistic? And B, does it bother you at all when it does, or could you not care less?
Yeah, I think I can pick up when it feels like the series is venturing into territory that maybe just stretches the
Okay.
realism.
I
And
was just curious. I was just
yeah,
curious.
one other thing I wanted to mention as well before we get into like specifics and spoilers is, uh, as I said, we do have the anime coming up in fall 2024. And from what we have seen, it looks like a pretty faithful recreation of the series, at least in terms of the aesthetic and the art and character designs, which is a good sign. I am hoping personally that it's going to be too core. I can envision already where that would end. Um, yeah, like I mentioned, I feel like it is going to become even more popular than it already is. Perhaps there is a ceiling to how to like the sales, how what they could reach for, but I do think it's going to get a boost. I do think people are going to be talking about it. Um, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I don't even watch a lot of anime adaptations of manga these days that I am familiar with, but I think this is going to be one that I will want to check out to see the comparison when that is released. And I mean, obviously, Enzo, you're going to be covering it, I imagine, since you have been reading it since the beginning as well. What are your thoughts and feelings, at least on how much you expect season 1 is going to cover in the
Yeah,
anime?
I would expect two cores. I think it probably will be. My initial reaction on seeing the trailers is pretty much the same as yours. It looks extremely faithful to the aesthetic of the manga, the character designs, the backgrounds. It really, I mean, it looks very very faithful. It has a, the writer adapting it is Kakihara Yuko, who's one of the more established and quite excellent series composition people in the industry. So I have a suspicion it's going to be very on point, very, very faithful. Doesn't have a big name director. It's not at a big name studio, Telecom Animation Film. I mean, it is a big name studio, but it's not like one of the elite studios. But I suspect it's going to be a very solid, is a word that pops into my head, a very solid adaptation. And I think it will give the manga a boost. I think the manga is already quite popular. I think if you look at just based on sales, two series that started about the same time, this one and Akane Banashi, two series which we've talked about the other one on our show already. But I think, for example, as two series that have about the same vintage and about the same sales, I would expect Akane Banashi to have a bigger sales bump when it comes to the anime time than Blue Box gets. But I do think Blue Box will get a bump. As far as covering it on LIA, that's a given. I'm gonna 100%. I'm gonna cover it. There's that's my intention, and there's no reason why I wouldn't. And I like I said, I expect it to be good.
Comparing, like you say, comparing to the contemporaries it has in the magazine, I'm trying to think off the top of my head recent sales. So Blue Box, I think, is more in the range of Sakamoto Days. So that's just over 100K a month. So they're already hits established in the magazine. Akane Banashi is a little less, I think maybe around 60K, but they're all kind of in that same ballpark, that same level of success already. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that you think Akane Banashi will get more of a boost. Because if you were to ask me, I think my inkling is somehow I still feel Blue Box will get more of a boost. And I say that as someone who loves Akane Banashi and would
Interesting,
love nothing
interesting.
more than for that to become massive. But yeah, time will tell, I suppose.
Yeah, I just
Though
feel
I
like
feel
it
like
kind of. I think Akane Banashi to me has more untapped commercial potential than Blue Box is. I feel like Blue Box is already closer to its commercial ceiling than Akane Banashi is, but I could be totally wrong about that.
yeah, well, like we did mention in the Akane Banashi episode, if it does get that sort of adaptation that makes the most of Rakugo in the way that only anime can do compared to manga, then who knows? It does have a higher ceiling, perhaps, in that sense. Yeah, I think in terms of non-spoiler discussion, that covers most of what I wanted to mention. So, if anyone is not familiar with the series, I would just highly recommend it. It's a very charming, easy to read romance series which balances the relationships and the basketball and the badminton scenes. It's very enjoyable. Quite different from maybe you might expect if you're familiar with other recent romance rom-com titles in Jump, like We Never Learn or Nisekoi. It's definitely a different breed than them. So I'm kind of curious how mass audiences are going to react to the anime adaptation of this, and maybe the different pace and expectations in that sense. Though, if we're going to jump in the spoiler section now, which is going to be the mark for everyone who wants to skip forward to our recommendations, still discussing the anime, then you are going to cover, like you said, Enzo. As we've been having our conversations pretty much throughout the entire run of the series, now and then we check in what we're feeling. Um, I always felt that I was much more in a positive mindset about the direction of the series and developments that were happening. And basically, I had more security and feeling that Chinatsu and Taiki were going to be with each other, and anything that came up in between was in service of you could say that's a hurdle. You could say it's some development for either Taiki or Chinatsu to work around and realize their feelings for each other. That's kind of always the sense I had. And I think maybe also helped by the fact that knowing the one shot, assuming it's going to kind of go in the same direction that the one shot um, uh, established, which, like I mentioned, they do more in the one shot than they even have in the series, even at the point of recording. So, which is kind of crazy in of itself. But the introduction of Hina into the mix, I never saw her really as a real threat to their relationship, and I think I'm softer on her as a character. Do I like her especially? No, but yeah, especially if we're thinking about what's going to be covered in season 1, she's going to be pretty integral. Do you think your feelings on retroactively experiencing the series, knowing what you think is going to happen versus what you know is going to happen, like how you did with the manga now with the anime, do you think you're going to have a different feeling about her as a character or just this series as a whole?
Well, maybe a little in the sense that it is, it's not like I thought specifically you were wrong about how things were going to turn out. I just was has a little bit less certain of it than you were, so I had that kind of unease hanging over it. I think the issue with me is really that the biggest banana skin that this series has is it can get kind of tropey sometimes. It does tend to embrace and lean into the sports rom com tropes at times, and I felt like Hina was sort of the it felt like she was, to me, when she became prominent, kind of felt like it's like, all right, I'm going to check some boxes now. We're going to get the Osana Jimi box. We'll check that. We'll get the love triangle box. We'll get the snarky love rival box. And it just, everything about her, whenever she was integral to the developments in the series, to me, it felt like it bogged things down. It just felt like things got more kind of played out and generic, and at times genuinely irritating to me. Because I think she does sort of represent the less inspired moments, the less inspired inclinations that Aono Hako has. So less is more with Hina for me. So when we get to the anime and we kind of know, unless something really, really shocking happens, we kind of know how the whole triangle thing is going to play out. Yeah, it's not going to bother me as much, but I'm still going to be kind of like happy when we get past it, because I just don't feel like this is the best foot forward for Blue Box. It just doesn't represent everything the best that this series can be for me. And I'm not crazy about her either as a character or as the character's impact on the overall chemistry of the series. So, yes and no, I guess, is the best way I can answer your question.
Yeah, there definitely was that time. I feel like it's maybe the festival arc, which I think is round where season 1 will end if it is 2 cores. So you'll be very glad, I'm sure, to have multiple Hina episodes in a row to cover for that. um, I I don't want to say I called it or anything because I just had a feeling very early on, and also I felt quite secure in how it was going to turn out. I just felt there was also something between Kyo and Hina that wasn't particularly focused on in the initial chapters, but there was enough hints of their dynamic with each other, which um, is definitely coming more into fruition recently. We also have, so basically, we have that first love triangle which was resolved, and Hina lost, and now we have this new love triangle as a B plot, which, or maybe even C plot if you want to put it below the sports dynamics, the sports focus of the series, which introduces as well Ayame, who is Karen's younger sister, and like you mentioned, she's the manager for the team for the boys team, and I I don't have super strong feelings about Ayami in particular. I think she's cute enough, and she is a little bit tropey, maybe similar to Hina in that sense. Um, I still, if I was to like place a bet, I still think Hina and Kyo are going to end up together with this other love triangle. So I'm going to ask you two questions. One,
Mm.
do you care about this storyline? And two, you also have to place a bet. How's it going to turn out? Whether you care or not.
I have the same prediction you do. I think Hina ends up with Kyo, and I think she's gotten more tolerable now that that relationship is kind of
With
upticked a
Kyo.
little bit, because I like him, and I think he sort of brings out a better side in her as a character. So I do think she ends up with him, and I care about it a little, but really it's a love triangle with two corners that I don't particularly care for as characters. So to say that I really care about it, honestly, I hope there's not a lot of ink spilled on that. I'd really much rather focus on the main relationship and the sports side, which I think are both more important and more interesting.
We're in agreement then how that's going to turn out, I think.
I
And
think
then
so. Yeah. Much.
worth mentioning then, we've kind of avoided talking about it, but Taiki and Chinatsu do officially become a couple. That's kind of where they are now in the series. Um, I think what is funny to even think about is where we are in the story right now. We've basically got two full seasons of two core anime worth of material. I think, I said festival arc is maybe where season one would end. Season two, I think, naturally feels like it would end at the end of the school year because recently we've had that introduction of so many new first years, who I like most of them actually. I think they're not super focused on at this point yet, but I like the different elements and flavors that they add to the supporting cast, I think. Um, but yeah, it's so funny even to think that this season is going to come out and people are maybe expecting a resolution, and that probably won't even come until the very end of season two.
Yeah.
Do you think that relationship took too long to become official? I mean, they're taking baby steps. Shout out to
Yeah.
another series. They're taking baby steps to get in terms of their relationship. Are the steps too small, too infrequent? Do you think?
Not for me. We live in the light
Okay.
novel era where people expect to have things explained to them. Never mind in the first chapter, they want it explained to them in the title. They want the title basically to be the entire plot. So for a lot of people, they're probably going to look at this and say, yes, it's too slow. I look at the characters and I say, well, look, first of all, there's an age difference between the two of them. He's younger than her by a year and probably more than a year younger in terms of maturity. The fact that they do end up living under the same roof actually makes it harder for them in ways that, especially him, in ways that I think the author does a very good job of kind of demonstrating how that makes it harder without harping on it. So there's that aspect of it. And Taiki he's not a big, brash, outgoing sort of a boy. He's kind of keeps things to himself, and he challenges himself, but he's not big on like projecting, and so it takes a while for a kid in that situation to get to the point where it's like, okay, I'm ready to be in a relationship with this girl who's a year older than me, who's in a higher social circle than me, who I have to cohabitate with. So no, I don't think it took too long at all. I think it was very natural. And listen, and if the series resembles Adachi in any way, that's probably one way it does, because he takes his sweet time in getting the characters in their relationships where they're going, because he's more interested in the journey than he is in the destination. And I think, if you look at the really good romances in manga and anime, generally speaking, I think there are romances that do focus more on the journey than the destination, because in the end, the journey is more interesting. And because these are series that deal mostly with teenagers who are in always in a state of transition anyway, it's always more interesting to watch them going through these transitions than it is to actually have them like, oh, great, we're here. I think once you get to, oh, great, we're here, a lot of times either the series is over or it loses its forward momentum because the author doesn't really know what to do with it once it gets there. So I'm perfectly happy with the pace at which it's going. But I also think that manga readers are more forgiving of that than anime viewers as a rule. And I do expect to see some bitching about it in the anime fandom community when the anime comes out. It's like, good God, just kiss her already. This is taking forever. I do expect we'll see some of that. And, Jimmy Crack Corn and I don't care.
Yeah, I think that is going to happen. If now that we know how the relationship has at least played out so far, I will say when it gets to those moments of their feelings becoming
Intimacy.
more apparent for each other. Yes, yeah, and once everything comes to fruition and they solidify their relationship, I just think those moments are so excellent. They were so well done that even if there was ever any doubt of how long it was taking,
Yeah.
the
And there's
the
so much
journey
there's so
felt
much more
rewarding.
so much more satisfying when it takes time realistically to build up to them than if you just fast forward
Yeah,
and jump right to them.
yeah, definitely. And for Chinatsu specifically, like you mentioned, she's a year older than Taiki. Where we are in the story, we're not quite midway through, but we're partway through her last year in school and Taiki's second year in high school. I'm not sure how long the series is going to go on for because I actually saw people thinking the series would end with the first school year, which I never thought was going to happen. I think even if the romance is still the romantic side and intimate side of the relationship is still developing at similar pace as it was before in terms of the steps that they're taking. What was initially more of a focus on maybe the love triangle or um, like the beginnings of their relationship and their feelings, now it feels like the sports stuff is almost like the A plot sometimes. And we just check in on Taiki and Chinatsu and how they're doing with their sports journey.
That
Yeah,
has an ebb and flow to it. That has an ebb and flow to it, and that will flow back in the other direction eventually. I'm sure of it. I bet the ranch on it.
maybe it is safer to say it will end with Chinatsu's final year, and that's the resolution we'll get. If we get another year with Taiki just there himself and maybe less Chinatsu and I don't know, other girls get introduced, I imagine maybe that's not the direction you want the series to go, but I think that is maybe a possibility if it does keep going on. Though at this point, this relationship they have is endgame. The fact that for a Weekly Shonen Jump series, especially, that the endgame wasn't the second last or last chapter, but probably a good half of the series is going to be still about the relationship. Is
Yeah, for
I'm looking
sure.
forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Um. Cool. I think unless you have anything else that wraps up any of the spoiler specific points to
Nope, I'm
cover,
good.
we can go over to recommendations. Why don't you go first, Enzo? I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Well, I thought it would have been very easy to recommend Adachi. I could have said Cross Game or H2, but like I said, I do think there is an Adachi fan is likely to like Blue Box. I'll say that up front. I think that's pretty safe. But I have felt that the similarities have gotten less rather than more as the series has progressed. So I chose to go with Baby Steps for a couple of reasons. One, I absolutely adore Baby Steps. I think it's stupendous. You mentioned it earlier. Thank you for the plug. I don't know if you realized at that point that I was recommending it, but um, the other thing is, um, I think Baby Steps takes a somewhat similar approach to the sports side than Blue Box does, in that it really focuses on the effect of hard work and dedication and self belief, and it's very realistic in terms of just in sports we have a term that someone is a grinder, and Taiki is a grinder. He's not someone who wows you with his ballet like movements and his superhuman athleticism. He's athletic and talented, but his hard work, his dedication, his stubbornness, and his intelligence that makes him successful on the court. And Chinatsu's kind of the same way. And that's the deal with the main character in Baby Steps too, Achan. And I also think the relationship, the balance in Baby Steps is less 50-50 and probably more like 75-25 in favor of sports. But the romance between Achan and Natsu, who's the female lead, the romantic counterpoint to Achan, it has some similar vibes to it to me to the relationship between Chinatsu and Taiki. I think there is some similarity there. So that was really the one that came to mind for me as someone that has some kind of thematic and stylistic similarities with Baby Step with Blue Box. I'm going to go with Baby Steps by Hatsuki Hikaru, which, for the record, is probably my favorite sports manga of all time. So that's my pick. How about you?
Yeah, I have watched both seasons of Baby Steps. I still need to get around to finishing the manga that's on my long list. Um, I would say it kind of does have, for someone who hasn't read the manga, it's almost like a workman-like adaptation. Maybe not super inspired in that sense,
No,
but
not
it's
super
definitely
inspired. It's
one.
fine. It's fine.
Yeah, yeah. But I do want to check it out, and I think what you mentioned about the relationship definitely has echoes. Blue Box has echoes of that in it as well. Yeah, that's a good recommendation. I think for me, I'm going to recommend um, a series by Suika Momoko, which is titled uh, 18, 18.44, which is the unit of measurement within that series that is referenced. And this is another. The reason why I picked it is this is another series that focuses more on the romance and sports side. There are other sports series I could recommend, or other romance series, but there aren't too many that I feel get balance that is similar to Blue Box, kind of like you mentioned. It is worth mentioning this is just a one volume BL manga, so it is quite different in that sense and the pacing. But Suika Momoko, she has just lovely, like I would describe it as like a very light touch to her art style, very bubbly. It's a childhood friend picture catcher dynamic where their growing relationship for each other affects their ability to play because of perceiving how they don't want to injure each other. So yeah, if I'm comparing something that has two main characters that both play a sport and that sport is integral to their relationship, then that's one that's going to be my pick.
Cool.
For final scores, then I think I'll go first.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a series. Like I said, I've been reading it weekly since it came out, and I really enjoy it. I feel like it has so much more still to go, and how it's going to expand on their relationship. At the moment, my rating would be an 86. I don't think it's going to change too much from that. It might increase, it might decrease slightly depending on how the series resolves, but that's pretty much the area where I put it, which is for me very very good score for a very very good series.
And I'm going to go 83, which I think reflects that I have probably a bigger problem with some of the things which you're kind of indifferent towards. I'm a little beyond indifferent towards, so I think they probably are more of a detractor for me than they were for you. But on balance, 83 is a really high score for me, and I do think it's probably among my top two or three series in the magazine right now. So I really do like it, and I hope it goes on. I hope it goes on after Chinatsu goes to college. I think there are avenues that they could follow if they want to do that. It would be very atypical for a weekly Jump series with this theme to do that, but I would love to see it happen. And so my score is not too far off yours. I'm at 83.
Nice. In that case, then that wraps up this episode and our trilogy of episodes on Weekly Shonen Jump series that we're both reading and up to date on. So yeah, thanks again, Enzo, for joining me and chatting about series from my favorite magazine.
Cool beans.
And next time we're going to be jumping, I believe, back into our recommendations for each other. So you can look forward to seeing our thoughts and feelings on a series that each of us has recommended. So yeah, stick around and see you guys next time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.